A brief history of neuropsychology. Researchers in the 19th century began to think about behavior from a physiological perspective. Many of these early thinkers formed the foundation of current knowledge about neuroanatomy, linking the functions of specific areas of the brain with thought and behavior. Franz Gall, 1758 to 1828. Franz Gall had one of the earliest theories that behavior, intellect, and even personality might be linked to brain anatomy. He developed the doctrine of phrenology. The basic idea was that if a particular trait was well developed, then the part of the brain responsible for that trait would expand. This expansion, according to Gall, would push the area of the skull that covered that part of the brain outward and therefore cause a bulge on the head. Gall believed that one could thus measure psychological attributes by feeling or measuring the skull. Although phrenology was known to be false, it did generate serious research on brain functions and was the impetus for the work of other psychologists through the remainder of the 19th century. Pierre Flourens, 1794 to 1867. Pierre Flourens was the first person to study the function of the major sections of the brain. He did this by extirpation on rabbits and pigeons, also known as ablation. In extirpation, various parts of the brain are surgically removed and the behavioral consequences are observed. Flourens' work led to his assertion that the brain had specific parts for specific functions, and that the removal of one part weakens the whole brain. William James, 1842 to 1910. William James, known as the father of American psychology, believed that it was important to study how the mind functioned in adapting to the environment. His view was among the first theories that formed functionalism, a system of thought in psychology that studied how mental processes help individuals adapt to their environments. John Dewey, 1859 to 1952. John Dewey is another important name in functionalism because his 1896 article is seen as its inception. This article criticized the concept of the reflex arc, which breaks the process of reacting to a stimulus into discrete parts. Dewey believed that psychology should focus on the study of the organism as a whole, as it functioned to adapt to the environment. Around 1860, Paul Broca added to the knowledge of this physiology by examining the behavioral deficits of people with brain damage. He was the first person to demonstrate that specific functional impairments could be linked with specific brain lesions. Broca found that a man who'd been unable to talk was unable to do so because of a lesion in a specific area on the left side of the brain. This area of the brain is now referred to as Broca's area. Hermann von Helmholtz. Hermann von Helmholtz was the first to measure the speed of a nerve impulse. By actually measuring the speed of nerve impulses in terms of reaction time, Helmholtz is often credited with the transition of psychology into a field of the natural sciences. Around the turn of the century, Sir Charles Sherrington was first inferred the existence of synapses. Many of his conclusions have held over time, except for one. He thought that synaptic transmissions was an electrical process, but we now know that it is primarily a chemical process. Organization of the human nervous system. The human nervous system is a complex web of over 100 billion cells that communicate, coordinate, and regulate signals for the rest of the body. Mental and physical action occurs when the body can react to external stimuli using the nervous system. In this section, we will look at the nervous system and its basic organization. Central and peripheral nervous systems. There are three kinds of nerve cells in the nervous system: sensory neurons, motor neurons, and interneurons. Sensory neurons, also known as afferent neurons, transmit sensory information from receptors to the spinal cord and brain. Motor neurons, also known as efferent neurons, transmit motor information from the brain and spinal cord to the muscles and glands. Interneurons are found between other neurons and are the most numerous of the three types of neurons. Interneurons are located predominantly in the brain and spinal cord and are often linked to reflexive behavior. Neural circuits, called reflex arcs, control this type of behavior. For example, consider what occurs when someone steps on a nail. Receptors in the foot detect pain, and the pain signal is transmitted by sensory neurons up the spinal cord. At that point, the sensory neurons connect with interneurons, which can then relay pain and impulses up to the brain. Rather than waiting for the brain to send out a signal, interneurons in the spinal cord send signals to the muscles of both legs directly, causing the individual to withdraw the foot with pain while supporting with the other foot. The original sensory information still makes its way up to the brain. However, by the time it arrives there, the muscles have already responded to the pain, thanks to the reflex arc. Let's turn to the overall structure of the human nervous system, which is diagrammed in Figure 1.1. The nervous system can be broadly divided into two primary components: the central and peripheral nervous system. The central nervous system, CNS, is composed of the brain and spinal cord. The peripheral nervous system, PNS, in contrast, is made up of nerve tissue and fibers outside the brain and spinal cord, including all 31 pairs of spinal nerves and the 12 pairs of cranial nerves. The olfactory and optic nerves, cranial nerves 1 and 2, are structurally outgrowths of the central nervous system, but are still considered components of the peripheral nervous system. The PNS thus connects the CNS to the rest of the body, and can itself be subdivided into the somatic and autonomic nervous systems. The somatic nervous system consists of sensory and motor neurons distributed throughout the skin, joints, and muscles. Sensory neurons transmit information through afferent fibers. Motor impulses, in contrast, travel along afferent fibers. The autonomic nervous system, ANS, generally regulates heartbeat, respiration, digestion, and glandular secretions. In other words, the ANS manages the involuntary muscles associated with many internal organs and glands. The ANS also helps regulate body temperature by activating sweating or piloerection, depending on whether we are too hot or too cold. The main thing to understand about these functions is that they are automatic or independent of conscious control. Note the similarity between the words autonomic and automatic. This association makes it easy to remember that the autonomic nervous system manages automatic functions such as heartbeat, respiration, digestion, and temperature control. The autonomic nervous system. The ANS has two subdivisions: the sympathetic nervous system and the parasympathetic nervous system. These two branches often act in opposition to one another, meaning they are antagonistic. For example, the sympathetic nervous system acts to accelerate heart rate and inhibit digestion, while the parasympathetic nervous system decelerates heart rate and increases digestion. The main role of the parasympathetic nervous system is to conserve energy. It is associated with resting and sleeping states and acts to reduce heart rate and constrict the bronchi. The parasympathetic nervous system is also responsible for managing digestion by increasing peristalsis and exocrine secretions. Acetylcholine is the neurotransmitter responsible for parasympathetic responses in the body. The functions of the parasympathetic nervous system are summarized in Figure 1.2. In contrast, the sympathetic nervous system is activated by stress. This can include everything from a mild stressor, such as keeping up with schoolwork, to emergencies that mean the difference between life and death. The sympathetic nervous system is closely associated with rage and fear reactions, also known as fight or flight reactions. When activated, the sympathetic nervous system increases heart rate, redistributes blood to muscles of locomotion, increases blood glucose concentration, relaxes the bronchi, decreases digestion and peristalsis, dilates the eyes to maximize light intake, releases epinephrine into the bloodstream.